Here we go again. And Oseremen before elevates a crime mystery to the level of sophisticated drama by peering into the deep psychological reasons for a couple's disputes, possible reasons for one to murder the other, while revealing some deep truths about the human condition. But my favorite feature of this movie is how it plays with our biases by carefully writing ambiguity and secrecy into the character that we see most in the movie, Sandra, and the character that we see least in the movie, Samuel. They do this in two main ways, and here's what they are. The first one is how they show us one character and not the other. We are properly introduced to Sandra, but not Samuel. We don't really know what he's like. All we know, especially for the first 30 minutes, is that he's working upstairs, most likely doing some kind of hard manual work, and he seems to be a good father, apparently able to afford quite a good lifestyle for his wife and son. The only really negative ambiguity we are given of him is when he's playing music in the opening scene, which we can interpret as him trying to disrupt Sandra's conversation and give us a bit of insight into a possible motive Sandra might have for killing him. Maybe existence with him was stifling and irritating, for instance. But what we see of Sandra is the complete opposite. We see a lot, in fact maybe too much. The camera is fixed on her, it follows her around. We see that she's cold, slightly more masculine than the average woman. In fact, I knew she was bi from the first scene. I mean, she clearly has more riz than most guys. Plus, the framing is very flirtatious, and her insistence on moving the conversation from something more serious, from the interview to a personal conversation with this smile on her face, is a dead giveaway. And obviously Samuel is either an uncaring bastard disrupting a harmless conversation from far away, which is hard to believe when you take into account what we've already conceded about his relationship with his family, or he's trying in the least violent way to stop an interaction that he knows he and his wife will regret, which means he can probably feel this charismatic tension from all the way upstairs, which puts even more scrutiny on Sandra's character. And I mentioned how she has a more masculine air around her because it's part of why it's easier to conceive her as the killer. Like, she's not a cute housewife hiding wickedness behind a nice smile. I mean, she has a nice smile, yes, but there's a killer in her eyes and an irritation as well. Even later on, right after his death, we see Sandra say that she's tired of crying, but we never see her crying. She's way more put together, not as red-eyed and distraught as we're used to seeing a partner of any gender act after just losing their other half. It's a very similar framing that makes Nick Dunn in Gone Girl seem like the most likely killer. In fact, it's very, very similar to that movie, in that with that movie as well, we don't really meet the real Amy until she wants us to, but we are shown a lot of the human pitfalls and inconsistencies of Nick's character from the start. And so, well, I'm not saying that they draw direct parallels, but I think if you've seen the two movies or any movies or stories that are similar, you start to think, hey, is Sandra about to be another possible female rage icon? Are we going to find out that Samuel was just so terrible and maybe she's actually hiding something about him, that's why she killed him? We're really thrown the bone of, if she killed him, and most likely she did, what did Samuel do to deserve it? And we don't know. In fact, that's the one thing the story does not want us to know, which leads us to the second takeaway and the second way that they wrap these two characters in secrecy and ambiguity. The second thing this movie does is that it pulls the rug from under us as we search for clues to solve the why, since we already know the how. And it does this by showing us what we want to see, the things we're suspicious of. Like, everything is set up in such a way that the simplest answer is that Sandra killed her husband, and yet we are given hint after hint that she either didn't do this, or she had even more sinister reasons, or a much more complex situation surrounds Samuel's death. I mean, for one thing, we're shown that they were going through financial trouble, so she doesn't have any monetary reasons to kill him. And then Sandra says again and again that she had no real problems with him, and even paints a really good picture of him, sometimes to her own detriment. And just as we're starting to believe, nah, maybe she didn't, they throw a secret argument audio tape in our faces, and that keeps us on edge because now there's something again that we still don't know, and it's teased and kept until later in the movie as we look for more clues that she is the killer, and then eventually we hear the argument just so they can rip the idea of the killer from us once again. And the interesting thing here is that we get to see the argument. Very interesting creative thing. Nobody at the actual hearing got to see the argument. They don't see the nuances in Sandra's face and to understand that she wasn't at all being malicious. All they're hearing is voices. And they could have left it like that for us too, the audience. But then it's very hard to sell the idea that Sandra is not the killer. Because when we see it and the way we see it, it shows that while she's sure being a bit violent by the end of the argument, she's not at all volatile. In fact, for most of it, she's controlled and calm up until the very last moment. And it's in fact in this argument that we see that if anything, Samuel had all the motivation to kill her. She was free of him. She always had been. He resented that. She made small concessions here and there, but ultimately she was living life more on her terms than he was on his. And then we hear Danielle has something to say, because Justin Trier is enjoying watching us suffer, and that's the part of the fun of movies. Of course, you know how this ends. And in the end, Danielle says that Sandra couldn't possibly have killed Samuel because he confirms that his father did try to kill himself a month earlier. And that whole sequence of the movie is the most tense to me. If you're a dog lover, maybe skip it or prepare to hate Danielle by the end of it. I won't spoil it, just go and watch it. So yeah, those are the two things that they do. First of all, we are shown a lot of Sandra, very little of Samuel, which helps us to see things about Sandra that are clear, and then just imagine that Samuel is the best person in the world up until, of course, the argument. And then second thing is, along the way, they keep not giving us the answer. They keep pulling out from under us, making it not as simple as, well, she killed him and this is why. But if Sandra didn't kill Samuel, who did? Click on this video to watch the explanation of the psychology of Samuel's death, or if this is the end of the ultimate guide. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Oseremen and I'll see you soon. Peace. Justin Trier.